Some coaches are recycled, but only a few are called back to finish what they started. RichRod returns with a swagger and a playbook still nasty enough to flip the Big 12 on its head. In this episode, I break down the numbers and pull apart the legacies, and I answer the question every Mountaineer fan is asking. Is RichRod just a retread or a redeemer? Better grab your stats. This is the Trust the Beard podcast. Is RichRod a retread or the redeemer? We'll find out in this new episode of the Trust the Beard podcast. Mountaineer Nation, it's good to be back. This episode is about 7 months in the making. If you remember last time we were here, I told you I didn't think RichRod would get hired. Well, I was wrong. I'll tell you what, though, feels good to be wrong. There's a lot of excitement in the air, a lot of nostalgia. I think it's a good time to be a Mountaineer fan right now. And so we'll get into the episode here. We'll kind of compare some coaches who returned back to a program for the second time. We'll look at the numbers, we'll break it down, and see how that's going to compare to what the expectations are for RichRod. But before we get started, do a little house cleaning. Got my Fold Your Silk in my favorite mug, ready to start the day. But I want to ask you guys to please subscribe, like, and share this episode to all of Mountaineer Nation to keep this thing going. It's been a lot of fun. But if you want some more social media content, you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or X at Earbeard. That's EERBEARD. For the audio version, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. So let's dive in here. Before we get started, we'll do a quick rundown of Rich Rodriguez in his first tenure at West Virginia. We all know the highs and lows, the heartbreak, but he was hired in 2001 to replace the longtime coach Don Nehlen, Hall of Famer. He was here for 20 years. I remember that day pretty vividly, too, because it was like November of 2000. We just lost to Syracuse on a last-second touchdown. And in that press conference, Don Nehlen announced his retirement. And so me and my friends are sitting around the tailgate. I was a freshman at WVU at the time. And we're all kind of wondering, who the coach would be, the new coach, because, I was born in 82. All I've ever known is Don Nehlen. He was everything for WVU football. And then right then, my friend, his dad, came up to us. He said 2 words. He said, Rich Rodriguez. We're kind of all looking at each other like, who the heck are you talking about? We weren't in tune with the coaching carousel and the up-and-comers, but he was. And sure enough, that's who they hired. So December 2000, they hired Rich Rodriguez as the next head coach. And, the rest is history. That first season was a little rocky, right? 3-8, but we saw some flashes. 02, 03, 04 was kind of the proving ground, right? We were building the foundation. We won a couple Big East titles, or we shared one Big East title. We almost upset Miami. We beat Virginia Tech a couple times, ranked, beat Pitt. I think Rasheed Marshall won Offensive Player of the Year in the Big East. But we were really becoming not just a Big East contender, but a national contender. We were really making our way onto the national scene. Of course, 05, Pat White, Steve Slayton, splash on the scene. But I think what fans forget is we didn't hit the ground running that year. As 05 began, we beat Syracuse like 15-7, and it was just a clunky, awkward offense. It was a 2 QB system with Pat White and Bednarik. Eventually, Bednarik gets hurt in the Louisville game. We're trailing. Pat White comes in, and just, again, the rest is history, right? It was like lightning in a bottle. And we won that overtime game. We went on to go 11-1 that season, upset the SEC champion Georgia Bulldogs in the Sugar Bowl, thanks to a Phil Brady fake punt. Then the next year, I think we go 10-2 or 11-1. I can't remember. But we keep the momentum going, right? We win the Gator Bowl against Georgia Tech. But we are now considered a perennial power in the nation, right? We are a consistent top 10 team. And Slayton and White, you add Owen Schmidt, it's one of the most, if not the most, potent backfields in all the nation. And of course, we fast forward to 05. We all know what happened, right? We had a great season. We saw ourselves in the number 2 spot, poised for a national title appearance, and we stumble against Pitt, but we win the Fiesta Bowl. We keep the momentum alive, show the nation that we are still a potent team. But unfortunately, we did it without Rich Rodriguez because he left for Michigan. I remember that day vividly as well. I was still in Morgantown, still working and living, even though I was out of school. I went to my friend's house and I went to his apartment, and the first thing he said was, "Did you see what happened to RichRod?" You know what? Oh, he's going to Michigan. Of course, I didn't want to believe it. I was like, no, the same thing happened last year with Alabama. It's all just rumor, speculation. He's like, no, it actually happened. Sure enough, he was right. It wasn't just a coaching change. It was kind of a cultural earthquake, right? A lot of heartache for a lot of fans. But that's the way the cookie crumbles, right? And so we're going to trace back the winding road that brought Rich Rodriguez back to the Mountain State. So, of course, he was hired at Michigan. High expectations, but some controversy, right? They never kind of fully embraced what his system was. And I think that ultimately led to his dismissal, right? There was also some NCAA violations, which led to some sanctions. But I think mostly it was his spread offense and his idea kind of clashed with Michigan tradition, right? They're the Big Ten. We play at noon. We line up in the eye, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of thing. That wasn't Rodriguez's style. And so ultimately, there was kind of some fallout there, and he was fired in January 2011. So then we go to 2012. He's hired at Arizona, has some success early. In 2014, they won the Pac-12 South. They reached the Fiesta Bowl. He had 43 wins, 3 bowl wins in that time. Had some notable players, nationally. But in 2017, he was fired amid a harassment lawsuit, which was later dismissed. But it was kind of a roller coaster tenure, right? There was flashes of brilliance, some inconsistencies, and then some off the field issues kind of clouded the ending. And really, that was kind of the MO for his tenure at all 3 places, right? It's WVU kind of left in dismay. Same with Michigan and Arizona. So these next 3 years, I kind of call the wonder years, right? WANDER, because he kind of bounced around in some supporting roles, kind of out of the spotlight. In 19, he was an OC at Ole Miss. 2020, he was an analyst at Hawaii. And then 21, he was assistant coach and OC at Louisiana Monroe. And so these years were kind of quieter. I think they gave him time to reflect and recalibrate as a coach, maybe get some new ideas for an offense, try some new things, see how the game is developing. But also, I think it gave him time to kind of recalibrate as a human being as well. Maybe look back at his previous stops and realize that maybe I'm not such a great guy and I need to not make bad decisions. Hopefully that's what he did. I think so. He kind of seems to have some regret about the way things happened, but we'll have to see how that goes moving forward. But regardless, 2022, he got hired at Jacksonville State. They were an FCS team. They went 9-2, and then transitioned to FBS in 23, where again they won 9 games in the New Orleans Bowl. And then 2024, again 9 wins after starting 0-3, won the Conference USA title, and was named Conference USA Coach of the Year. So at that time, he still proved that he could build a winner and do it quickly, which bodes well for WVU because, after the last 6 years, we're hungry for a contender. And with the kind of turnover we have, there's not a lot of time to build. We don't, there's no year 0 here, as I've heard it many times before. So on December 12th, 2024, 9 days after I proclaimed that I don't think Rodriguez is going to come here, Renbaker made it official that they hired Rich Rodriguez back to West Virginia. Of course, he replaced Neil Brown after a disappointing 6-6 year. His mission is to reignite the Mountaineer spirit and kind of restore us to national relevance. And so, he's already making some waves. Obviously, we know about his intense workouts, climbing law school hill, the hard edge, everything he brings to it. Kind of rebuilding a staff. We brought in DC, Zach Alley out of Oklahoma. So it looks like there's some real upswing here. And hopefully this program has a real shot in the arm of energy. And that's what we need in year one. So that's kind of the story. Rich Rodriguez, from WVU to Michigan, to out in the desert, the bayou, and to the small town in Alabama. He's finally come back to the hills of West Virginia. And it's really been a journey anything but ordinary. And now he's back where it all began. And I think this time he's not just trying to get wins. I think he's chasing his legacy. And so when we come back, we'll kind of look at 8 coaches who started out at a program, left, and then came back. And we'll look and see how they fared. And we'll use those numbers to kind of project where we think Rodriguez will end up at his second tenure at West Virginia. Okay, we're back. And as you can see here, I brought up a chart. We're going to look at 8 coaches in particular that did the same thing that Rodriguez is doing, right? They left one program and then came back again later. And we're going to compare the wins and losses from each stint and then the change in win percentage. As you can see, the guys we're going to highlight, if you're not watching this, you're listening to it. We got Bill Snyder from Kansas State, John Robinson at USC, Johnny Majors from Pitt, Greg Schiano at Rutgers, Mac Brown at UNC, Randy Edsall at UConn, Brady Hoke at San Diego State, and probably the most infamous Bobby Petrino at Louisville. Well, as you can see on the far right, there's the change in win percentage from one stint to the other, and it doesn't look favorable, right? It's all in the negative. None of them lived up to the expectation, or at least to the success of the first time around. Most notably, Johnny Majors at Pitt. He won the title there in '76, but left for Tennessee, came back, and really just couldn't get the momentum back at Pitt, and really kind of failed miserably, honestly. Randy Edsall was at UConn, couldn't get it together, and then Bobby Petrino, his win percentage dropped by 25%. But if you look at the first tenure, he was at 82% win percentage. I mean, that place, Louisville, was on fire when he was there. And he had success at Louisville, but, unfortunately, it just wasn't the same the first time around. And as you can see, it's kind of a ongoing theme with these coaches, is they just don't have the same success. And so that kind of adds some weight to the stakes for RichRod's return, right? The win percentage drops during the second stint. And so he's not just kind of fighting history here. Hopefully he's trying to rewrite it and be one of the more successful coaches to come back and do it. But we're going to look at the stint, or how long their tenure was the second time around. So here you see these coaches, each of the programs, and this is the length of their tenure the second time. Obviously, Bill Snyder was there for another decade. You got some like Schiano is going on his 6th year, right? He's still there, so he'll probably end up going 7 or 8, hopefully. Maybe, we'll see. I don't know. Mac Brown at UNC was at 6, but you look at the rest, I mean, it's only about 5 or 4 seasons. And so you look at the bottom there, the average tenure for these coaches the second time around is 5.57 seasons. So with that, we can kind of expect maybe Rodriguez will be here about 6 seasons, right? Maybe until 2030. We'll have to see how it goes if he's successful. Hopefully he's there for that long. Hopefully he's there for longer, because that means, we've had great success with him here. So next we're going to look at kind of the first year that these coaches came back and what their records looked like. So looking here, you can see on the left column beside the coaches, this is what the program's record was before the coaches returned. So, with Kansas State, they had 5 wins before Bill Snyder came back. Pitt had 3 wins before Johnny Majors came back. Mac Brown, UNC only had 2 wins. So you can see on the far right there, this was the change in wins since their return to those programs. And that averages out to about 1.25 wins. And so with that, you can kind of expect, WVU had a 6-6 year with Neil Brown last year. Hopefully that means we can have a 7-5 year. And so when we come back again, we will go through all of this. We'll crunch these numbers. We'll average everything out. We'll kind of look at where we think Rodriguez is going to be at the end of year one. Okay, so we looked at these numbers, and we're kind of going to apply them to Rich Rodriguez's tenure here at WVU the second time around. So as I said, the average win increase of those coaches was 1.25 from the previous year before they got there. So, West Virginia was 6-6, as we said, in 2024. So if you apply that 1.25, it looks like a 7-5, which I am completely on board for. I think that would be a great first season to kind of get some energy back in the program, especially with our schedule. It is kind of difficult, but I have really two requirements for this year and kind of an optional third. One is beat Pitt. First and foremost, I think we have to do that. We all know about 13-9, right? RichRod's last game as a Mountaineer coach. It's on 9/13. I don't think that's a coincidence, right? I think something's written in the stars, and I think it's inevitable that we will win that game. At least I hope so. And so that's the first thing I want. Then I want to reach a bowl game, right? At least go 6-6, and that optional one is win a bowl game. And so if we have that 7-5 record that history tells us is possible, hopefully we can. And it looks like we will have a bowl win with that. But what's different about these other coaches is if you look at the schools when they return, they were kind of really, really down, with the exception of maybe like Louisville, and I think the other one was USC when Robinson returned. We're talking 2, 3, 4 wins, something like that. Despite all of our I won't say hatred, but disdain for the Neil Brown era, he still went 6-6. Now we know it could have been a lot better with what he had returning. That's not the argument, right? It was disappointing, but 6-6, or 6-7 with the bowl loss, it's not terrible, right? We weren't in the tank. We were still middle of the pack, kind of keeping our head a little bit above water. So the program didn't completely bottom out. So that 1.25 could be a little harder to achieve. Plus now you have all the turnover that we've got. So we'll just have to see. But again, if it is that 7-5, I think that's a great start. And so now we'll kind of project what I think Rodriguez, according to the numbers, right? The history has showed us the averages, what his tenure is going to look like. So like we said, 5.57 is the average tenure of those coaches. So we'll call it 6 seasons. So, that tenure length for Rich Rodriguez will be 6 years until 2030. Projected win percentage, as we saw, the average drop in win percentage from the first stint to the second was 18.4. So the first time Rodriguez was here, he had a 69.8% win percentage. So if you subtract 18.4, that's 51.4. That's not good. So calculate that out, 12 games over 6 years. We won't count bowls because obviously we don't know if we would make one. That's 72 games. So you're looking at a 37-35 overall record after 6 years. Boy, does that sound familiar? I think we just got rid of a coach because of that. Now that could play out different, right? It may not be 6 straight 6-6 years. It could be 1 year, you go 3-9, and then it's counterbalanced by a 9-3 or even a 10-2 season. Who knows? But that overall record, hopefully it's better than that. And if it is that, like I said, the first scenario or the second one, hopefully it's a slow start, and then we come out with a bang like he did in the first time. So we'll have to see. But, the history tells us that the second stint fades, right? It's not as successful. But then again, history has never met the hard edge. That's something that's a little bit different for Rich Rodriguez than it was for the other guys, right? The data tells us it's 51% over 6 seasons. It's only 37 wins. Well, I'm hoping that's the floor. Because I don't think Rich is here to just fade quietly. I think he's here to finish what he started. And so Neil Brown left the program at a simmer. RichRod is here to bring it to a boil. And I don't think 7-5 wouldn't just be progress. I think it's proof that the fire is back. And so we'll take a look at why I think RichRod is going to fare a little bit different than these previous coaches. We looked at the numbers, we crunched all that, what we thought could happen in his tenure, but now we're going to explore what makes RichRod a little bit different and how his second tenure could be a little bit more successful. So it's going to answer the question, is he a retread or is this a redemption story? So first off, two things that are either going to hurt or help Rich Rodriguez is the NIL and the transfer portal, right? College football is totally different than it was 17 years ago when he left, right? You could transfer, but you had to have a darn good reason. Now you can just transfer because whatever, you just don't feel like being there anymore, or you want more money. So it's a complete wild, wild west show in college football right now. And so that can hurt Rodriguez or it could help him. It could hurt him, like we have the kind of roster turnover that we have, and you got to get all these new guys, up to over 60, almost 70 guys, I think it is now, up to speed and into your scheme. But also on the plus side, is it addition by subtraction? Like the guys that left, are they guys that are going to thrive in your program anyway? And so now with the NIL and portal, you can go handpick your players, right? You don't have to settle, or you're not left with whatever the previous coaching staff gave you, right? You don't have to try to mold those players. You can go out and get guys that are ready. And I know that Rodriguez and company have really focused on a senior heavy class, or at least veteran heavy class. So to get more experience, more maturity, that could play in his favor. That could be a huge step in getting to 7-5 or more, right? We've seen the blueprint with Indiana, right? The guy gets hired, Signetti. He brings a lot of his staff and his players from JMU. They were successful at a smaller level, and he has instant success. Now, the difference with Indiana and WVU is Indiana has a much, much bigger NIL, we'll just say NIL donors, for lack of a better term. They have a lot more money than we do. So, but with Rich Rodriguez, he does bring that hard edge, which can turn players into, it can really churn out their potential much higher than some other coaches, I believe. But anyway, so that's one reason that could get Rodriguez separated from these guys. He is in an era now. Of course, Schiano's in it as well. Mac Brown was in it for a little bit. But it looks like Rodriguez knows how to fully embrace this time in this day and age in college football, where maybe Schiano hasn't quite yet, or maybe Mac Brown couldn't have. And the other guy certainly not, because it wasn't really around at that time. So it's a whole new era, and we'll just see. And Rich Rodriguez seems like he is embracing change. Like that's one thing he's always done well is, he has his rigid ways of his system and hard edge and all that, but he is flexible, right? He's malleable about how to treat a player, or, how to come to terms to get them to understand what he's trying to do, right? Because players change over time. And so I think that's the advantage that he has right now. So what we're going to look at now is the other advantage I think he has. And we'll look at all these coaches prior, and we'll ask, we'll talk about when they left, when they came back, and were they on the upswing at the time. So we'll run through these real quick. So Bill Snyder at K-State. Okay, he retired in 2005, returned in 2009 because Ron Prince kind of ran the program into the ground. Although Snyder didn't have a great record his last season, he came back because, he's deeply tied to K-State. It's his identity, it's his legacy. And he kind of wanted to restore its competitiveness, which, we can understand. Rodriguez is doing the same thing. Now, was Kansas State, or was Bill Snyder on the upswing? No, he had retired. He had left football for 4 years before they brought him back. And I think he was in his 70s when they brought him back at that point. So, again, not exactly on the upswing. John Robinson, USC, had great success with the Trojans, won the title in '78. I think left for the NFL, came back in '93 to stabilize the program. He had some small success, some bowl wins, but never lacked the dominance, or he lacked the dominance that they had in earlier years. Would you say he was on the upswing? No, because he had kind of fallen off to the wayside in the NFL. I think he was with the LA Rams. They only won like 3 games, so he was kind of what you would call a retread. And then Johnny Majors is probably the most notorious that fell the furthest, which is great because he coached at Pitt. So I will never, or I will, I'll always celebrate that. But he was at Pitt, won the title in '76, left for Tennessee. It's where he played. It's where he's from. And then eventually he was kind of forced to resign. He kind of had a bad last season. He had to stop coaching for health reasons. He came back, went 2-3 after the team had gone 3-0 under Philip Fulmer. And so he was there to kind of revive the program. And so would you say he was on the upswing? Definitely not. He went 12-32, never recaptured the same past glory. And again, he had taken a break from coaching because of health concerns and just never got Tennessee back on track and was kind of forced to resign. So next, Greg Schiano. We all know him from his Rutgers days back when Rodriguez was at WVU before. Kind of had a failed stint with the Buccaneers in the NFL. Was at Ohio State as I think a D coordinator, I believe, or at least an assistant, and returned in 2020 to rebuild the program. Was he on the upswing? I would say no. Rutgers was, they were rock bottom, so he came back. And he's never really recaptured that same success as he had before. But in between, he wasn't coaching, or at least he wasn't a head coach, right? He had some time off, and he was at Ohio State as an assistant. So, again, kind of a retread. So we look at Mack Brown, the most recent one, really that, he just retired. But he coached UNC in the 80s, had some great success. Then he went to Texas, won a national championship, all that fun stuff. And then his last year there went 8-5 and basically was forced to resign because they were just not living up to the expectations. So he returned to UNC in 2019 after a long break from coaching, right? He was doing a lot of studio work and broadcasting. And UNC basically wanted someone to navigate the new NIL. So that was his purpose, to kind of be a steward of the throne, so to speak, for UNC. I don't think it was a long-lasting opportunity for him. Or at least wasn't what was presented to him. I think it was mostly just to get us on the right track, and then he can sail off into the sunset. But he did have some success, right? He had an ACC title game appearance, and he definitely reinvigorated the program, but never the same success as before. And would you say he was on the upswing? No, he was retired again, just like who was that we said before? K-State, Bill Snyder. They were out of the game completely. So Randy Edsall, we'll run through real quick. I mean, he had some pretty good success at UConn. Went to the Fiesta Bowl, and then he left to go to Maryland. Had a terrible showing, and then eventually he came back, and his second stint ended poorly. He was 6-32, and so on the upswing, definitely not. He was somebody that didn't have success at the Power 4, Power 5 level, and for lack of a better term, and kind of be a little insensitive, he kind of had to tuck tail and come back home. Brady Hoke, on the other hand, he had some success at San Diego State. He was there for a few years. Eventually started coaching at Michigan. Had success with RichRod's players. I'll repeat, he had success with RichRod's players. I believe they went to the Rose Bowl. They might have won that. But then as the years went on, as the seasons, he proved that he was not a very good hire. He couldn't maintain that level of success. And so he meandered here and there, some assistants, and then he eventually ended up back at San Diego State, where he had a pretty solid tenure with them that time around. he set a school record in 2021 with 12 wins, and then eventually retired. So he did have a little bit of success. Would you say he was on the upswing? No, not necessarily, because he wasn't a head coach before that. Like, right, he was fired from Michigan and then kind of had to work his way back. Now, Bobby Petrino, again, probably the most infamous one of all. A lot of controversy in his career, but had great success at Louisville, and then turned that into an NFL head coaching job in Atlanta. Didn't do too well. Bolted without telling the players. I think he left a letter in the locker room. I believe that's how it ended. But he had controversial exit at Arkansas. I think he got in trouble by it was an office assistant. They were having an affair. They were riding a bike. He got in a wreck, and basically everyone found out about it. And so he was forced to resign, or was just plain out fired. Then he went to Western Kentucky, had an 8-4 season, and then eventually returned to Louisville in 2014. Had some pretty good success. One season he had Lamar Jackson where he won the Heisman, and so he was able to revive the program a little bit. But with all that said, the reason that what makes Rodriguez a little different, and I'll say this first, that Petrino and RichRod, they're really the only two that returned to Power 5 programs, or Power 4, however you want to look at it, after winning 8 or more games as a head coach somewhere else, and without a break in between. I know that's a lot of caveats, a lot of qualifiers, but that's what separates RichRod. And one of the other things that puts him over the top is RichRod is the only one to have 3 consecutive 9-win seasons before returning to that school for a second time. The rest that came back, they were either fired, they retired, or they were kind of pushed out, right? They resigned. And often they were after losing seasons. So that kind of makes RichRod's 9-4 finish at Jack State and the 3 straight wins, 9-win seasons, a rarity in the group. And like I said before that, there was no gap between that. He wasn't forced out and had to come back and then go into coaching. He kind of was a hot commodity. Now, I know a lot of other people weren't looking at him, probably because of his age and history, but I think that's something that Ren Baker and some donors were able to look over and understand, that he still is relevant. His system is still relevant in the world of college football. And so he is a rarity with all these other coaches. He has some momentum. It's not baggage this time, and he has a conference championship. So he arguably has the strongest momentum of any coach on this list. And so I'll just say personally, as I was kind of opposed to him coming back, like once I started thinking about it and I started showing the clips or watching the clips of him on the plane, coming back, looking at the trophy room, boy, I got so excited, because like I said, I was at school at this time, and it was such a fun time to be a Mountaineer fan. And I think if we can recapture just an inkling of that emotion and that success, I think it'll be worth the hire. And like I said before, we've seen it with Indiana. We've even seen it within our own conference. I mean, look what Dion did with Colorado, right? They won 2 games, 1 game year before he got there. And then last year they were till the end competing for a Big 12 title spot. Now they didn't make it. He kind of fell short, but what a quick turnaround in 2 years. And we saw it with Arizona State, right? The first year, I forget the coach's last name, but his second year there last year, they were picked last. They completely turned it around, won the championship, gave Texas all they could handle in the college football playoff. And so it's possible. The blueprint is there to show that Rodriguez can be successful here. So when we ask the question, is Rich Rodriguez a retread or redeemer? Well, right now I have to lean towards a redeemer. I think he has a lot of momentum behind him. Are we going to see instant success like we did, or like we had, or he had with Jacksonville State? Probably not. But again, if 7-5 is the mark, I think that's a huge step in the right direction. And so, like I said, I think we are on the side of Redeemer at this point, right? There's no baggage anymore. You know, he was on a hot streak there at Jacksonville State. So here we are. A program that was fractured has been forged together again. You know, a coach once vilified, now venerated. And RichRod isn't just walking back into Milan Puskar Stadium. He's marching back into a destiny left unfinished. You know, this isn't a nostalgia tour. This isn't a retirement plan. This is a reckoning. And I don't think West Virginia is looking to relive the past as much as it wants to rewrite the future. And, you know, RichRod has been very open about that. And he's the man who lit the fire, or lit the flame, and I think he's back here to finish what he started. So this time, you know, for the fans out there, the climb is over. This time we're bringing the hard edge. This has been the Trust the Beard podcast. God bless, and as always, let's go Mountaineers.